We're going to start. Welcome to talk outside. There's no requirement to stay. We're talking, looking at you. That's okay. So I have nothing. This is not meant to be formal. There's going to be lots of formal things. So it'll be nice if we could remember Ross for this next half an hour, 40 minutes. I'll start. So he was a conference organizer. I mean, this conference is one of many examples of conferences he organized. I met him in '93. In 1996, he organized a 6-month workshop stint at something called the Newton Institute, which is at Cambridge, the other Cambridge, the first Cambridge, whoever said that, and invited a bunch of us cryptographers to stay there, either in residence for 6 months or to come at different times. I made the mistake of coming twice for a couple of weeks and not staying the entire 6 months. If you stay the entire 6 months, you figured out some way to associate you with one of the colleges. And there's still people today who have that college affiliation from that time. During that time, he actually organized 2, possibly 3, I can't remember, workshops. Fast Software Encryption happened there. I think the first Protocols workshop happened there. And then a third one, which I'm fuzzy on. And it was, very much a convening of people studying cryptography. Again, it was narrower, but it was broad. And it was just a way he brought the community together in a way that he did one before and did many times since. I think the entire field owes him a debt for that.
Well, I thought about remembering Ross talking about the 2 of the workshops he started. This one, SHB and WISE. WISE, some of you know what it is. For those of you who don't, it's the workshop on the economics of information security that Hal, Bruce, and Ross started. I think the first one was either 2001 or 2002, right? And I remember one of the very first panels, Bruce and Ross debating, are we investing enough in information security, or are we investing not enough? I don't remember which side you took, but I remember it was engaging. And I was a young PhD student at the time, and both Bruce and Ross were already super famous. I remember sending an email to Ross because, as an economist myself, working on privacy, I became interested in the fact that the computer scientists had decided to write about the economics of security. That was the time when his later extremely famous manuscript on why information security is hard had just come out. So I tried my luck, sending an email to this big shot, hoping that as he was coming to Berkeley for one of the security conferences at WISE, he could meet me, and he did, because it was a star-eyed, intimidated. That sense of intimidation both with him never entirely went away, even as I came to know him more and more, and I came to know how warm and incredibly wicked funny he could be. That side of him I discovered through SHB, which started 4 or 5 years later. We were again at WISE, 2007. At the time, a number of us started working on psychology and privacy, psychology and security, which was what Bruce was doing, or in the case of Ross, criminology and the psychology of cybercrime. So we were at WISE in Pittsburgh. Laura was there, and I was hosting the year. And George Lowenstein, a well-known behavioral economist, gave the keynote talking about the behavioral economics of privacy. And Ross, during the break, said, "Hey, I think we should start another workshop because there is so much to do about behavior, psychology, security, privacy." And so the 3 of us decided let's do it, and that's how SHB was started in 2008. And one of the last times I met Ross was after SHB at CMU last year. Many of you were last year in Pittsburgh, and Ross, Bruce, and I had dinner at my house afterwards. I have fond memories of the dinner, hearing the incredible stories that Ross had, and again learning about this warm and wicked, funny side of him that it may not have been so visible from conferences alone.
So in 1993, I was already living and working in Cambridge, England, as a research engineer. And I went along to the university to a talk, because I was a crypto nerd using PGP and all that kind of stuff. And there was a talk announced that said why crypto systems fail. Sounded exciting. Okay, so I go along, and there was this unknown guy who was giving a talk about banking systems, and he was revealing things. I mean, how did he know that kind of stuff? There was crooks who were taking a bank card and rewriting the MAX drive with their own encrypted PIN, but the account of someone else, and then that worked for getting money out of someone else's account with their own PIN. All that kind of stuff. How did he know this thing? But this was a really fascinating talk, both because of the technical insights and because of the fact that he was basically defending the small guy and sticking it to the man and explaining that the banks were pretending that all was fine when it was not fine, and he was demonstrating, and he had the balls to speak up and say all this. So that's this cool guy. And I didn't know who he was at the time. I didn't know why he was there. It looked to me like he was a guest speaker in one of this series of talks, and instead he was a PhD student. He was a mature PhD student of computer security pioneer Roger Needham. And so when it came my time to do a PhD as a mature student, I decided to do it with him, which was a few years later, and I never regretted that, and I learned all my trade from him as a computer security professor now. What I want to talk about is an anecdote that is before my time, which was retold to me by his director of studies when he was an undergraduate. So Ross was an extremely bright kid from youngest age, and he was typically among the best in his class. But he was, quite bullied and nerdy because he had been born cross-eyed, and he had a kind of surgical operation at the age of 3, but he still didn't have binocular vision. And so he was not able to do any of the ball games that all the other kids did, like rugby and cricket and so on. And basically you were a social outcast if you could not do these things. And that, plus the fact that he was one of the cleverest ones, really made him an outcast socially. So he had a very unhappy school time, as I hear. I mean, that I heard from him. So anyway, at about the age of, his dad was a professor of pharmacology or something like that. And the expectation from his schoolmaster was that because he was so clever, he would become a lawyer. And from his father, that he would become a doctor. And at around the age of 15, he found a book in a library about mathematics. And that really fascinated him. And I mean, he could cut through the mathematics like through butter. And he decided that's what he wanted to do. So in Scotland, he would go to university at 16 and do 4 years at university, as opposed to in England, where you would go at 18 and do 3 years. So he went to Glasgow University, but he had been signed up to medicine, as wanted by his parents. But he somehow managed to sneak into the mathematics course, even do mostly that, despite the medics keeping on. And not understanding how anybody could get in to admitted to medical school and then not want to do medical school. Anyway, he did a year of mathematics at Glasgow. And then he noticed all his lecturers had a PhD from Cambridge. And he said, I must be in the wrong place. So if I want to do serious mathematics, that's where I should go. So he decided to switch over and had an interview at Cambridge, was admitted, and he was parachuted into the second year of mathematics at Cambridge, at Trinity College, which is super hard. So he had a pretty hard time about this, skipping a year in one of the hardest places where you can do mathematics. But nonetheless, he was great, and he was finally in his element, because that was another place full of just geeks and nerds who just obsessed about the intellectual content and had no social skills. So in that period, in Trinity College, in University of Cambridge, there's many colleges, and you belong into a social group depending on your college. In Trinity College, which is famous for mathematics particularly, there were traditions, one of which involved that the students would prank each other and burglarize each other's rooms and do various things, such as putting the bookcases upside down and all this stuff that the 18-year-olds do at Cambridge. Anyway, so there was a kind of ongoing challenge between these various students, and he went. There was a kind of this other student put a note on his door. Haha, see if you can. And he took this up, and he picked the lock to the room of this chap, and a minor explosion went off. Because the guy who had set up the challenge had booby-trapped his room. So the porters were worried that this was some kind of terrorist incident, so they called the police. The police came, the police officer comes in, comes to inspect the room, turns on the light, bah, another explosion. The guy had rigged up the light as well. And so this became a kind of a big deal. And to make a long story short, there were other things, other mischievous things that these guys did, including trying to get hold of the. So there was a list of which order people got their marks, who got the highest marks on. In Cambridge, this is divided into classes. You get first, or 2-1, or 2-2, but within those bands, it is not revealed who did better than the others. No, an ordered rank is compiled, but is not divulged. And there was, again, one of these other traditions was the students would try and steal their thing and try to figure out who was there. So they were caught, these same two chaps, in the act of breaking into the office where this thing was kept and said, no, we wanted to borrow it for a few months, the time to use the Xerox machine. And so as a result of all these things, they were both suspended for a year.
No.
Yes. And that's the year that Ross spent in industry to work on inertial navigation system and get some insight into the real world applications of mathematics. And by the time he came back to Cambridge the following year, he said he had a different outlook on things, and pure mathematics, which he thought was going to be his field, was no longer that appealing, and that may have been the thing that eventually steered him towards the practical security engineer.
Thanks very much.
I'll just be brief. I wanted to say something, actually, of course Frank knows Ross a lot better than I ever did. But, so if you say that he had very little social skills, I'll believe you. But
I think he improved since then.
He improved maybe over time, yeah. But the one really, really nice thing that he did for me is that, an assistant professor trying to, apply for tenure last year. I guess that the word went out that it was up for tenure. Maybe Alessandro, you had mentioned it to him. I don't know. But during SHB last year in Pittsburgh, he came to me and asked me, Laura, if there's anything I can do to help you in the process for your tenure, please do reach out. Please do let me know. I'd be delighted to write a letter for you. I had never worked with him, and I guess all he knew about me was, the interactions that we had at SHB and maybe WISE a couple of times. But I will always be very grateful. I guess I'll never know if he wrote something. Sorry, I'll never know if he wrote something for me. But thank you, Ross.
You can try and hack into the Arizona database to see who wrote the letter.
I just want to say that if I gave the impression that I thought that Ross had no social skills, I would not. That was his own description of himself as going to university like that. But Ross was extremely sociable, and when I was his PhD student, I was several times invited to his house with a whole group of people and delicious dinners and so on. So that's not at all what I meant.
But it's already a headline already, so it's already.
I've already tweeted it.
We already tweeted. Sorry.
All right, I guess I'll go next. So, hi everyone. So I was a PhD student of Ross's. I met him in the fall of 2004 when I started my PhD. And I grew up in Oklahoma, attended the University of Tulsa. I mean, we left a few times, but not very far, right? And so I went from, being raised my whole life there to moving to England, doing my PhD. I mean, it was definitely a cultural shift, I would say. But it was a tremendous experience, and looking back, you can kind of see things you didn't really understand at the time. And one of the things that Ross really did well that hasn't been discussed so far is he really established a great community there, right? So there is the security group which he was sort of head of, and we had regular meetings. As Frank mentioned, we had these nice dinners, and I think I learned so much from him. And just a few stories for those of you at Weiss who may hear. I'll repeat myself a little bit, but number one, I'll never forget my very first in-person meeting with Ross. So I had a phone call before I got admitted, but then I showed up to his office beginning of October, start of term. It's our first research meeting, and not really sure what to expect. And we sit and meet and kind of discuss. And he says, "Well, what do you want to do?" And he says, and we kind of talk about a few things that I may be interested in. He said, "Oh, that sounds good." He said, "Well, here's how it's going to work. Essentially, you have your first year where you go off and do your research, you have your first year Viva, and basically you can go off and do whatever the hell you want for the next 12 months, but you come back in a year and we'll see what happens." And that pretty much is an exact quote. And so at least that's how I remember it. And it was intimidating but liberating at the same time. And I'm here to tell you, I definitely did see him over the course of that year, right? I mean, we never had actual scheduled meetings, but my office was right next door, and so he would always pop in whenever, something was on his mind that was relevant to what we were doing, and that would devolve into a research conversation and provide lots of guidance. But the key about that was really he essentially set me up and all of his students up for independent research careers, right? So I mean, you really, it gives an environment that there's still a very supportive community, but it feels like you really have to be the one to make that headway. So I was maybe 10th PhD student, somewhere along those lines. So he had kind of established that community already by that time, and so I'll just and I think it really was great. And I think one other thing that maybe echoing what Laura talked about, I think many of us have experiences where, particularly as junior scholars, he always looks out for his students, but also others, right? So trying to give opportunities probably sooner than most faculty ever would, right? So so my first Weiss was in 2005 here at Harvard. Gave a talk. Actually, it was right before your lunch. You had a lunch sort of keynote, so I was extra intimidated by that. But anyway, that was good. And then so we had that, and then the next year, Weiss was going to be in Cambridge, England, and so Ross was like, "All right, Tyler, you're the general chair." Right? So okay, all right. And so I did that. It worked out okay, right? And then it's like, an editor from Science wants him to write a survey article about security economics. He said he would do it, but I needed to co-author it with him, right? And so I think he, from the beginning, looked out for students and junior scholars to try to lift them up, which I think is one of his best legacies. The other thing is, so Bruce mentioned that Ross was a conference organizer. He was a conference instigator, right? That would be more accurate, right? He created Weiss, he created SHB. Apparently, he created was one of the co-founders of Information Hiding, Fast Software Encryption. Helped set up the Cambridge Cybercrime Center, which now has its own whole sets of events too. And so, he was always creating and bringing together people from disparate disciplines. And so often in each of these communities, we only see the one side that he's brought together, but he's just done so much of that. And I think that's tied to his encyclopedic knowledge, right? If you've looked at his book, you understand, right? That's definitely there. And he's always very good at making connections. So one of the nice things is that even when you're writing papers, it's always good to go to him before you ever complete your related work section, right? So you talk about what you're doing, and then he will just make these connections that you had never seen before. And I think that's what was one of his certainly academic gifts. And to the practical side of things, maybe carrying the story forward a bit from where Frank left off. So he was a mature PhD student. He had a career before coming back to academia, right? So he went in the bank. So how did he know to criticize the banks? Well, he worked for them, right? He worked in that industry in different, South Africa and different places over the years. And I think that, when you look at his legacy academically, he's done so much in the practical side of security, which is really informed by just his entire career trajectory that way. And I think it's surprising for someone who had such an extensive academic career to think he actually came to it late, right? I think it's and for someone who died so young, right? He did so much in such a compressed amount of time. And I think we can definitely say he had a life well worth living. Okay, the last thing I wanted to mention, a story, not a great one, but it's all right. We have these meetings, Friday meetings. That's one part of the community. The other part is he and Shireen, his wife, would always invite the security group out to their house, usually about once a year or so. Which they didn't live in Cambridge; they lived out sort of in the country, the English country. It seemed far away, but you go out there, have that amazing meal. Shireen would cook this Indian food that was so good. The thing that I remember the most, though, was one of the dinners. Everyone's having a good time. There's wine, and then all of a sudden, I just hear the loudest blaring noise I had ever heard, and it was Ross. He brought out his bagpipes and started playing them in the dining room, and I swear it's the loudest noise I'd ever experienced. So, it was very good, and he was also a pretty accomplished musician. He made quite a mini career of sorts, busking and playing bagpipes. So, those are my memories. Thanks.
There are videos of Ross playing the bagpipes on YouTube.
Oh, you can control the volume.
For those of you who don't know, bagpipes are meant to be played on Scottish hillsides.
Not in small dining rooms.
to intimidate the enemy.
Or PhD students.
So I didn't know Ross anywhere near as well as the guys who've already spoken, but I wanted to give my impression partly as an Englishman, because I think everybody who's spoken so far has been not English. Ross, of course, was Scottish, but spent most of his career in England, and there is a difference. I specifically say that for the Americans amongst you. There is a difference. I was an Englishman who did his PhD in Scotland. I also did a shift. I was originally a technical computer science in the really obscure area of computer science, and then I moved across to information ethics. And I first met Ross when I was doing that shift. And what struck me about Ross, and you talked about the intimidation factor, Ross would speak truth to power. This was clearly, right from my first impression of him, that he was somebody who would speak truth to power. He would not try to intimidate. The intimidation, I think, was on the other side, that people were intimidated by his knowledge, his vast encyclopedic knowledge of all these different areas. But he was, when you talked to him, he was always welcome. He listened to you and to your ideas, and he brought you into his communities. So having gone to Cambridge to give a talk on software licensing, it's one of the things as I was moving into the field of information ethics, one of the things I was interested in was software licensing. So I went to give a talk at Cambridge about software licensing, and Ross came to that, and I spoke with him afterwards. He came up, he had very interesting views on what I'd spoken about. He wasn't dismissive of me as someone who was doing a shift into this area. And I saw that over the years, whenever I encountered him, that he was welcoming to PhD students, to people from other fields. And he was always listening to what they were saying and picking up those things, and he was supporting them in being interdisciplinary and in their speaking of truth to power. And that's what I think I'm going to miss most about him, is he's one of those people who could and did fearlessly speak truth to power and enable other people to do that as well. Mm-hmm. So that's my abiding memory of Ross.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I first became pals with Ross. So I'd been working in the lab for a bit of a while. Actually, when I joined the lab, I didn't know who he was. I just took the piss out of him for being another securities god. But I first became pals with Ross, actually, the first time I came to Shub, which some of you may remember, because I came as Ross. So effectively, yeah, it was a bit grim. So essentially, Ross he was convinced he'd been banned by Trump from travelling to the US because they put an indefinite hold on his visa application. Actually, it was possibly not that, but he was pretty convinced he'd been banned, and in any case, he couldn't come to Shub. And I'd never been to America, and I mentioned this to him, and he said, all right, he said, I've got an idea. He said, I'm quite jealous of Ed Snowden, because he's got this little robot that they take to conferences. He says, if it's good enough for him, it should be good enough for me. So he says, why don't you be my Ross bot? And so, essentially, Shub and Weiss were co-located that year. I think it was 2019, possibly. So effectively, I showed up to Shub. I picked up a name tag that said Ross Anderson, which really confused a lot of people, especially because I had an iPad on a sling around my neck with Ross on a Skype call for most of the conference. But in classic Cambridge style, unfortunately, this didn't work because they'd skimped out and it was a second generation iPad. Extremely slow connection speeds. But over the course of organising this sort of slightly ridiculous farce, Ross and I became pals, and we got to know each other really well. As a number of people have mentioned, Ross was particularly fearless about speaking truth to power. One instance of which I remember was Cami and I went out for a meal with him, and Ian Levy, who at the time was the technical director of NCSC, which is one of the most entertaining conversations I've ever witnessed in my life, particularly the point when it became clear that Ian had been building up to ask him to support NCSC in adopting their client-side scanning paper.
That went well, I'm sure.
To which, and apologies for quoting Ross directly, said, come on Ian, get fucking serious. But yeah, I guess I'll just finish by, so he had a really good sense of humour, and he was incredibly supportive, and I really miss him. But one of the funniest memories I have of him was at the Cambridge Cybercrime Centre. We scraped lots and lots and lots of criminal forums, and just people messing around online. And they actually read the papers that we publish. So we'd occasionally see mentions of like papers and people talking about them. And we were in hysterics because we were searching for these papers, and we found someone saying, who the fuck is Ross Anderson? He sounds like a script kiddie. And we took this to Ross, and he went ballistic, and he said, it's just a good job that we're not allowed to send this stuff to law enforcement. But yeah, so, yeah, all really.
So yeah, one of the Ross was. I think you said now that he's gone, he left a crater, right? You talked about people leaving a hold. He created an amazing community. So the program committee of the first Economics of Information Security was like Bruce Schneider, Ross Anderson, Hal Varian, Larry and Marty, and then this junior faculty member, Gene Camp. Like I was like, am I tall enough to ride this right? But he always like kicked up and kind of nurtured down, and you experience that as and then like I got more senior and I got tenure, and we started to be in a situation where he'd give me grief and I would give him grief back. He created community. He made a huge difference. I think he reached out to me for two reasons. One, I was really involved in the first crypto wars, and two, I wrote this paper about, hey, a vulnerability could be a thing and you could price it, right? But he's why we had end-to-end encryption. He didn't just take on power, he didn't just stand and yell, which he could do very effectively. He changed the world we're living in. We have, the US, they lost the end-to-end encryption battle, and then all the same suggestions came up in the UK, right? And he was there, and he was the point on that. And there are people at Microsoft that I swear to you are still mad about trusted boot, right? Because that would have killed, Linux. And but he was also just funny. He had travel bagpipes. So the first time I met him was at Financial Cryptography, and I think he was also one of the people who may have been.
I don't know.
I
don't think so.
I don't know.
So one of my kids was there, and she played euphonium, which was actually really funny because she weighed like 80 pounds at the time. So, and he comes out with travel bagpipes and starts playing them on this beautiful, previously peaceful beach. Like, if my cat made that noise, they would be at the vet. But he was so sweet, and he showed her how to use, travel bagpipes. But then at the same time, like so many people have said, if like the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security had shown up, you wouldn't have shown him how to use it. You'd have told him what was, he was doing wrong. So he was so multi-dimensional. He wasn't just warm. He was also fierce and intense. You can get in these intellectual arguments and be very intense, only about ideas, right? Like if you change your idea, he changed his he would just change his interaction because he wasn't about, you are the person that is wrong. It was like, this idea is wrong. And, and his fearlessness, his last two papers, one of them was on hate groups, right? These are people that will threaten to kill you when you publish research, right? They're like, oh, yeah, they threaten, yeah. And you're like, oh, I wonder if I'll really get shot in the head today. And then his very last paper was literally on Gaza versus Israel, right? I mean, he was fierce, and I admired that so much.
Mm-hmm.
So I've known I've known Ross for about 25 years, 30 years, and collaborated with him on a few papers, these joint, these multiple authored, Bruce and all. What I'm going to miss most about Ross is the incredible way he could think about how to strategize as we fought battles. I didn't always agree with him, and God, he could be fierce. God, he could be fierce. I won some of those. I didn't lose all of them. But he had an incredible sense of how to strategize as we fought various political battles. Who to talk to, where to get a piece published in the press, how to get it supported, who else we should have. As I said, I didn't always agree with him, and I won some of them. I lost many of them. But that piece of him. You know, we'll miss him intellectually. We'll miss him for his ability to create groups, for his helping up young people. We'll miss him for the socializing he did, and some of us may miss him for the bagpipes. But I will severely miss him. And one of the thoughts that's been running around my head in the middle of the night for the last 2 months is, who the hell is going to be able to do these things? Because we really need them, especially in the UK, you guys. We can do it in the US. We know how to do it in the US, sort of. But in the UK, God, we need somebody to be doing that stuff. And so that's one of the things that I'm going to most miss. Thank you.
So I want to leave some time to regroup before we start the next session. So thank you all for this.
I want to say about the Ross Fest.
Okay, yeah, please.
Yes. So I've been thinking of doing some event for Ross since the day after I heard about it. And I ran this past Shireen, and the various dates have been floating around. Now it's been fixed. It's going to be about a year from his death. The 25th is not the exact anniversary, but we're close there. And rooms have been booked, and it's going to be in association with another workshop that's been running since 1993 called the Security Protocols Workshop, at which Ross was a frequent attendee. And so 2 invitations for the price of one. The 25th, which is a Tuesday, 25th of March 2025, is going to be this Ross Fest, where we are going to have people presenting in a fest script. It's usually collaborators of the person who write scientific papers in honor of the career of the person, and there's going to be an element of that, and we have prepared to have a book. Originally it was going to be with Springer, but I then decided to just self-publish it so that there would be fewer limitations and make it all available, PDFs for free and all that stuff. But there's also going to be the kind of stuff we've just heard about, memories of people interacting with Ross. Anybody who's been inspired by Ross in any way is welcome to contribute, attend, and so on. And then the next 2 days is going to be the Security Protocols Workshop, which runs in the usual way, but is going to be dedicated to Ross, and the theme of the workshop is going to be any security topic that you would have discussed with Ross and he would have argued back, kind of thing. And web pages for these events are not up yet, but when they are, I'll pass them on to Bruce, who will email them to the mailing list. Thank you.
All right. So thank you all. We will reconvene at the bottom of the hour to start the next session. Please
1:30,
bus.
1:30.